I just went live on my camera just so that everybody knows. Okay. Good.
No, not yet.
I'm not sure what I have at the moment. Let's see if I can do it.
No,
It's way too little, so.
I don't know.
Yeah. So it was in real Italian, so.
This?
Yeah. I know, it says Italy. It's nice. It does say that, yeah.
It's supposed to be for the.
Oh, okay, yeah. That's what I thought. I didn't watch it very much. So, I thought I was watching next one.
Yeah.
This is Lisa. Help.
Okay, I'm going to speak from back here, because if I go to the front, I'll never get back here again. Unless you don't mind if I step over heads and stuff. But anyways, thank you all for showing up. This is a presentation sponsored by the Lima Public Library and the Lima Historical Society. We're joint partners in presentations for the community. I'd like to present, for all of those of you who don't know, Holly Watson, who is our presenter tonight. She's also Livingston.
I'm waiting for someone, I'll be back.
She's also the Livingston County historian. She's going to be, for those of you who don't know, and those who are here you probably do know, that this is the 250th year of Livingston County. Not the 250th year that Holly's been on Earth.
You feel a little older every year.
But she's going to give us a presentation about, I take it, about the county in those 205 years.
That's right, yeah. I'll give you an overview.
Minute by minute?
Yeah, we're going to be here a little while. Get ready.
So, thank you.
All right, thank you.
All yours.
Thanks, everybody.
Cheers.
Thanks for coming and squeezing in here like a little turkey thing. You all ready back there? Okay. Great, so thanks for the introduction, John. I work in Mount Morris at the Livingston County Historian's Office. So unlike the Lima Museum and the Tenny Burton Museum, I don't have a museum, but I have a research center with archives, so I have a lot of photographs and maps and information about people and places and events in our area. And so I like to take these presentations out to the public to share these things with people. And you're all welcome to give me a call or an email anytime if you have questions about our local history, or you're doing research yourself, or you just saw a cool building and you wonder about it. So I do have some brochures here if you want to grab one at the end. So tonight, this is a pretty intimidating title for a presentation. So what we're really going to do is, here's a quick roadmap. We're going to cover a lot of ground, but it will be a bit of a whirlwind tour of the county's history and our region too. So some of the topics we're going to start with here are indigenous culture of Western New York, to set sort of the footing. Early Western New York land and the formation of Livingston County, because it's supposed to be a little bit about the history of Livingston County, so we will talk about how it was formed and some of the border changes that happened briefly. And then I'm going to pick up some major people, places, and industries, especially that make us who we are today, and that we can feel proud about, that are a part of our everyday lives, and maybe a part of history. We may not see this every day, but it still has built this foundation of where we live today. And so throughout all this, we'll have a lot of appreciation, I hope, for where we live and why it's a great place to live and work and play and be in this area. So we're going to start out going way back in time, and so I've got some images up here to help illustrate these things. So where we are today, before any of the European Americans were here, this all was territory and still is kind of in the traditional territory of several different Native American nations. So where we are, in the very western part of New York State, is the Seneca Nation historical territory and traditional territory. This map is interesting because it shows the general regions of where each nation's territory was in the past and kind of where their traditional homelands are. But then it also has some places we will recognize, towns and cities, and some of the territories today known as reservations. So the Seneca Nation in the western part, where we are today, is still alive and well. It's easy to talk about Native American things in the past because we may not see that culture day to day, but I'll show you a few places you can see it day to day. So as far as traditional lifestyle and what was going on here traditionally, the Seneca Nation and the Haudenosaunee, all of those nations together as a confederacy, kind of like the United States. They've made an agreement to each protect each other. They have a lot of different cultural life ways that I won't get into all of them, but agriculture is a foundational part of their lifestyle, even to this day. So the traditional crops that the Haudenosaunee grow are corn and beans and squash. And if you just say those three crops, it sounds kind of boring, like you just make a stew and that's it. But the more I thought about it, growing some veggies in my garden too, if you grow squash broadly, you can grow cucumbers, melons, like watermelon, pumpkins, then also what you might think of as squash, summer squash, winter squash. So there's a bunch of variety there. Beans, you can eat green or dry them and then cook them into things. And then corn, usually you can make sort of a flour, and you can make bread with it of sorts. And even the Seneca claim to have invented popcorn. So who likes popcorn here? Yeah, it's one of my favorite foods. I will eat it for dinner sometimes. So that's quite a lot of variety. And if you think about something like maybe Mexican cuisine, it has a lot of these foundational things like tomatoes and corn also, and peppers and things like that. And you can make a lot with all those things. The other way that they grew these traditionally, these crops together, is pretty interesting. So if you plant corn, it grows a pretty tall stalk and has the ears of corn on it. These kind of beans that they might have been planting traditionally, they could be pole beans, so they'll grow up around the stalk and use it like a pole to grow up it. So they can still get light, doesn't bother the corn at all, and they use it like a little trellis. And then the squash usually has pretty large leaves and will grow all around the ground, shade the soil, retain moisture, and so you don't have to weed as much, which is what everyone would like to do. So these crops are known together as the three sisters, or the three sustainers. They get along well, and they feed us. So that's kind of a foundational part of the Haudenosaunee lifestyle. And people still grow these crops together today. So, moving on, one really big watershed event that really is its own presentation. Many of these topics are their own presentations, so we're going to do a bit of a whirlwind, as I said. But during the American Revolution, so that we are entering the 250th year of the United States this year, in 1779, so a few years into the American Revolution, the relationship between the Haudenosaunee people, the Native Americans here, and the colonists was getting very tense. So mostly the people living here had been here for hundreds of years, if not thousands of years. Their ancestors had been here. Everybody wants to keep their land. They're protective of it. We feel that way today when we have our little plots of land. So the American Revolution that was happening on the East Coast between the British Army, the King, Great Britain, and the U.S. It started to involve the Native Americans more and more, and encroaching on what they perceived as their property and their area. So there were a lot of raids. There were violent clashes between colonists and Native Americans throughout the years. And they get kind of ramped up as the American Revolution continued to grow. And the British had been here for quite a long time, and with a lot of trade and diplomacy between the British and the Haudenosaunee and the Seneca specifically, they had more of a better relationship in some ways. The Native Americans, unsurprisingly, were thinking, well, there's the big country that's been so established, Great Britain. It's probably going to be a better bet if you're thinking like who to side with or who to help out than these upstart colonial people who are just kind of making their way and trying they're starting this revolution. So the Seneca were allied with the British, and not really, I guess, because they thought that the British cause was more noble. It was really more that they had a relationship with the British people who had been in New York State, or what would be New York State, for longer. So the Sullivan Campaign essentially was George Washington sent an army into this area, right where we are almost, in 1779. And really the point was to weaken the Seneca people. They were the most powerful nation of the Haudenosaunee at that time. They had the largest population, and they were tough, and they knew how to fight too. Sometimes we think of Native Americans as tiptoeing through the forest, but they had their diplomacy. They had lots of diplomacy, but they also sometimes used force, just like many people. So they were skilled warriors as well. So the army came through this area from southern New York State and Pennsylvania up into our area here. So they camped at the top of Hemlock Lake, came through Canisius, down at the foot of Canisius Lake, through Groveland, and their main goal was to get to Cuylerville in the town of Leicester. That's where Little Beardstown was. It was a really powerful, they called it a castle at the time, but it was a very powerful town of the Seneca people. And so all along this route, the American army, directed by George Washington, he wasn't there, he didn't come through this area, but he directed another general to come through this area. They were burning crops and towns all along their route. The people that were displaced had to rely on the British that winter for food and shelter. It was a really very tough winter, so it had a lasting effect on the people who had to go to Fort Niagara to be cared for when they didn't have the home or crops anymore to return. So the point was not to eradicate every last person, but to weaken the force, the strength of the Seneca army, essentially. Today, we might look at that with our own ideas, like the Geneva Convention didn't exist yet, and so the way that we think about this event has probably changed. At the time, they felt it was a success, but now looking back, we see that the methods that they used probably wouldn't cut it as far as the Geneva Convention today and the rules of warfare. So it is today not remembered fondly by the Seneca Nation. It's not the finest moment. They did return to this area, though, following this event. Came back to Kylerville, to Little Beardstown, and rebuilt. So they're very resilient. They were able to plant their crops again after a time and lived there for a number of years longer. But this event also it was the start of the European Americans moving into this area and entering some treaties. The U.S. and the Native American nations did sign treaties to relinquish the rights so that the land companies could buy and sell land, and settlers from New England mostly were going to come to this area. It was the western frontier. It was really exciting for the beautiful land that we have here to grow crops and make a new life on the western, it was the West at that time. So this event was foundational as far as what would come next and kind of how we find ourselves here today. That's a lot. Anybody have any questions about that? Again, it could be a whole presentation. That covers it a little bit. So, as I mentioned, the Seneca people did come back to this area, and the other nations of the Haudenosaunee were able to return to their original spots after the Sullivan Campaign. Certainly things are different today, and many indigenous people live on what we call reservations. They reserved that land for themselves during the process of the treaties, like the Treaty of Big Tree, which was held at what is now Geneseo in the 1790s. So a couple of these images show what's going on today, especially the Seneca Nation. So up in the top corner, there's Iroquois white corn. That some of those original heritage varieties of corn are still grown today, including this white corn that they can make into all these great corn flours, and you can make cornbread and muffins with them. The toasted one is especially good. So that's grown in the kind of southern tier, I think, near the Cattaraugus territory. Has anyone been to the Nundigan State Historic Site? Okay, you probably recognize it. It might be kind of cool. Did you ever go to it? Did you go in the longhouse? Okay, that might be pretty fun. So the longhouse over here is a replica. It's the traditional way that the Seneca people would have lived, kind of like one big family under one big roof. So this one is not an original, it's a replica at the Nundigan, but if you go inside, they have interpreters, many who are indigenous themselves, who talk about what life was like many hundreds of years ago living in a log house. Also, this little logo down here, what was interesting to me just this past year is the Rochester Nighthawks lacrosse team was recently purchased by the Seneca Nation. So I have not yet been to a game. I was invited and didn't make it, so that's on my list to do. But lacrosse was invented by Native Americans in this area, and has been played for a long time, and it's actually, it's like this whole league of lacrosse players. So, the Rochester team is not far away. They recently played Buffalo, so that could be pretty fun to see.
People sleep there.
People sleep there? Yeah. I would like to do that. Yeah, so there are a couple layers. The beds here would be usually piled with deer skins and other hides and blankets. Of course, there was a lot of trade even hundreds of years ago, and Native people living in this area had china and copper pots and all these things. They were not making things out of stone necessarily anymore. So they could trade for all these cool wool blankets and things too. But you could sleep here, and then you could store your stuff up in the lofts and sleep up there too. So it was a pretty cool place. So you can see how that is today. Okay, so a really brief overview of kind of after the Sullivan Campaign as things, as New York State developed kind of more as we know it. There were a couple of really enormous purchases by land agents, and it boggles my mind, so I'm going to try to just touch on it, but it's a lot of details. So the largest one was the Phelps and Gorham purchase. They were buying the rights to negotiate with the Native Americans and then be able to sell the land. So they were not buying the land with the deed outright. They ended up being able to only buy this much of the rights and negotiate for them, this third here. This is, where are we? It is part of where we are now. What is now Lima is right up in there. So it covers us. But then they could not pay the rest of the 2/3 of the land all the way to the west. So a couple other land agents came in and purchased it. Robert Morris was a financier of the American Revolution, but ended up losing all of his money by the end of his life. He couldn't pay either, and so then the Holland Land Company came in and finally bought the rest of the rights, negotiated, and after the Treaty of Big Tree, they were able to split that land up into smaller pieces and sell them off to settlers coming from New England to come buy their land and be on the western frontier. So all of these kind of negotiations and sales get really confusing in my mind, but I hope that kind of gets it across a little bit to you. Any questions about that part? Basically, yeah, it was sold piece by piece going to the west, and after the Treaty of Big Tree, which happened in Geneseo, right about here, extinguished the indigenous rights to the rest of western New York and established a number of reservations. They are not pictured on here, but there were several up along the Genesee River, and then one of the largest ones was where Letchworth State Park is, and where Mary Jemison was living. And I think I've got a slide coming up just after this about her. First, since I said I would talk about Livingston County history specifically, really quickly I will do that. So, at first, there were very few white settlers in this area, and so the counties were enormous. So, this one from 1804, Steuben County is all the way down here. We have Dansville in this area. And then Ontario County actually run all the way to Geneva, basically. From Geneva to the Genesee River, just past Avon, where we are, we're almost where we are today. The rest of it was Genesee County, all the way to Lake Erie. And there were very few people out that way, and so they didn't really need to have smaller municipal borders or county borders at that point. And then as time went on, more and more counties were created because it would be a real bummer if you lived all the way down here and you needed to go all the way up here to go do your business, So eventually they kept splitting the land up to make it easier to do all the things you need to do. So 1804, and then by 1821 they were like, all right, this area is too big. We need to make a new county so that people can get around more easily and we can kind of govern at the local level. So this is an early map from 1821 when they were planning where's the county seat going to be. And the county seat is where the courthouse is, where the county clerk is, and at that point, not very many other departments really. I guess the sheriff's office and a jail were going to be there. So some of those county level things that you need to have needed to be kind of central in this new county. So these circles that they were drawing were saying, like, all right, if we had the county seat in Avon up here, what would happen? What's that the center of? They drew a big circle. It turns out that a lot of the circle was way north of Avon and wasn't even part, down here. They were really far away in Sparta, for instance. So they tried drawing a circle also, I think around, I guess they had one in Geneseo. Where's the other one? Oh, I think Lakeville was another consideration. And so they kept drawing circles, and they're like, well, Geneseo is more or less in the middle, and at the size that the county was down here. Is anyone more familiar with Nunde and Portage and Ashen? Have you been down that way, or is anyone from there by any chance? Yes, of course. You don't really, there's no Ashen yet, is there? And there's no Portage or Nunde. So the county was a little bit smaller at this point. That circle around Geneseo covered everybody pretty well. So they chose Geneseo for the county seat. Probably also for some political reasons, because there were some prominent people living in Geneseo, but everyone who was prominent was trying to jockey for having that honor of having the county seat in their town. So the county's named for Robert R. Livingston, who never set foot here. He was a chancellor of New York State and lived out east in the Hudson Valley area. He was an important figure, so he helped to draft the Declaration of Independence, what we're going to be commemorating this summer, and negotiated the Louisiana Purchase. So he was a big guy, and so in honor of him, the county was named Livingston, but yes, alas, he never did see it. He would have liked it, I think, had he seen it. So that's that handsome fellow. All right, so Livingston County did get a little bigger. I mentioned Nunde and Portage are down here, so all of these two towns and this town they were not there originally. So there were some other boundary changes, like, so I guess the first one, North Dansville joined in 1822, so only a year after the county was formed. Sparta used to be 3 towns worth, and then it was split up in 1846. The same year, Portage and Nunde were joined the county, and then finally Ashen was the very last to join in 1857, which is really not that long ago, it feels like. I was reading about when it joined, it kind of messed up the number of assembly people that Livingston County was going to have. At the time, they were only going to have 1 assembly person, and for some reason the way it jostled around Broome County, way out in eastern New York, was going to lose an assembly person. And so there was a lot of squabbling at the legislative level. Ashen got to stay, though. I just couldn't figure out how many assembly people we had at that point, but it really doesn't matter. So there was a lot of political jostling for that, too. But now Ashen is part of us as well. So with a few other small border changes, that's Livingston County. As far as Lima goes, we were here pretty early. It's said to be settled in 1788. Which is exceedingly early, the same year that Phelps and Gorham started trying to buy all the rights for that land and then couldn't end up paying it all. And it was known as Miles Gore very, very early on. A gore is a triangle shape, and they used it a lot in land descriptions. It's not a word we seem to use anymore, but Lima has a sharp point in it, so it was called a gore for a little while, at least the western half of it. That was named after a guy named Abner Miles. But then it was Charleston, and we were in Ontario County at that point in 1789, and finally Lima in 1808. And where do you think, you know where some of the people came from in Lima? Supposedly Lyme, Connecticut, I think is where it came from. So Lyme, they just turned it into Lima to make it a little new, but then it became kind of like it was remembering some of their homelands. Finally, the village was incorporated in 1867, right after the Civil War. Okay, let's move on from borders, shall we? Did anybody have any questions about that, though? Okay. All right, so many of you have probably been to Letchworth State Park, right? Yeah. Have you been to Letchworth? Yeah. If you go up on a little hill by the Glen Iris Hotel, you see this statue of Mary Jemison. So the very quick biography of Mary Jemison was she was born to Irish parents as they came here from Ireland, Northern Ireland, in the 1740s. She was born at sea on the boat coming over, which must have been a terrible time. So when she was young, there was a party of Shawnee warriors and French soldiers who captured her in Pennsylvania. And unfortunately, this was one of those really brutal raids that all parties were engaging in at that point in time. And her family was mostly killed or escaped, and she was taken by the Shawnee and the French, and eventually adopted by the Seneca people. And then she came to live in this area over time. She lived at Little Beardstown near about the time that the Sullivan campaign happened, and then she moved into Letchworth State Park, or what would later be Letchworth State Park, after that time. So she married two different Seneca men over the years and had several children. So she was and she was adopted into the nation. So she was considered Seneca, even though she had blonde hair and blue eyes. She lived the rest of her life with the Seneca people, and near the end of her life was interviewed by a fellow who wrote a book about her life. So it's kind of supposed to be an autobiography, because it's from her words. He takes a few liberties, but it's still a really important book written in 1824, so very early, account of what it was like to live among the Seneca at that point. And of course, she was quite an interesting figure. Anybody around here knew the white woman of the Genesee. They thought, like, how would you want to live with the Seneca? Because they didn't think very highly of the Seneca, thought they were, backwards and Stone Age people, which was obviously not true. But they were surprised by it, thought it was kind of a novelty, and she was pretty well known. A cabin that she had built for her daughter Nancy is also right next to her statue in Letchworth State Park, so you can peek in the door. It's not set up like the way that it used to be when they were living there, but it's still mostly the same wood and the same construction style that it was when it was built, over 200 years ago now. So interesting site to go up there, and under her statue, her remains have been reinterred there. She was buried in Buffalo when she passed away in the 1830s. But people love to take souvenirs. They were chipping little pieces off of her headstone in Buffalo. And also the city was expanding so much that the cemetery where she was buried was being threatened. So William Pryor Letchworth, after who the park is named after, had her remains moved with her family's permission and assistance, moved to Letchworth State Park where she used to live, and it's on this pretty little hill by the Glen Iris. All right. This is a whirlwind tour, I am warning you. I'm hoping I can get through it all. Please start checking your watches and nodding at me if I get long. So, Letchworth State Park. Obviously, most of you have probably seen this view. If you haven't, I encourage you to go take a walk around at some point. It's really amazing. So, William Pryor Letchworth was involved in another institution as well. He was a charitable philanthropist fellow, and the next slide is about what he actually did, but he assisted the state with choosing a site for and building the first epileptic hospital in New York State. So it was a hospital for people with epilepsy. At that time, it was not well understood. And the site that they chose was called Sanye, and there was a Shaker community there. It was the only one in western New York, so it's notable for that reason. And the Shakers are kind of related to the Quakers. It's a religious group. And they're most remembered, they're not all gone. I think there are 2 or maybe 3 people left who are true Shakers. They live in Massachusetts, I believe, now. So the Shakers were, they were a Christian religious sect, and they were most remembered for being very industrial, and they worked for a living and believed that hard work would help connect you spiritually to what you were studying. So they made brooms, they grew seeds and packaged them. They're known for furniture, and also like the Simple Gifts song. Remember, they're known for simplicity. And now that I've said it, you'll probably have it stuck in your head like I do, but so the chairs and the woodworking that they did was usually very, it was simple and beautiful and well-made things. The other thing about them is that they didn't have children. They didn't marry. Men and women worked kind of in separate spheres, worked together, but they didn't have kids. So that was part of their religious belief. So they would adopt children and anyone else who wanted to join their community, and that's how they grew. But over time, they did kind of, the community here in Groveland, in Sanye, dwindled down, so it was only a few elders left by the 1890s. They had been there for about 60 years or so. They built all of these buildings. This is a drawing from the 1880s or so, showing that they had all of these workshops and homes and beautiful grounds, beautiful gardens and such. So in the 1890s, they were looking to sell their land, and New York State was looking to buy some land for this new hospital for people who had epilepsy. It was a very misunderstood disease, or condition, it's not a disease, condition at that time, and so the state thought it would be best to have a specific institution to help people who had epilepsy, hopefully find a cure and make people's lives a little bit better. So they established Craig Colony on the site of the Shaker community. It's named after the State Board of Charities president, not named after Letchworth. He just had a building named after him, but he did help establish this hospital in the 1890s. It has a very long, it's yet another program, so the highlights sometimes have they always have enough to talk about for a whole hour, so I'm skimming right over. But over its 90-year life, this institution lasted until the 1980s, and over its lifetime it saw kind of the rise and then decline of institutionalization as a general idea. When people had conditions that society didn't understand well, didn't know how to care for people with different disabilities, a lot of people ended up in an institution, and Craig did kind of end up to be one of those as well. People who worked there really believed that they were doing the best that they could, and I believe that too as well. But as time went on, during the 1980s especially, the deinstitutionalization took hold, and people with various disabilities usually went to live in a group home, which was a little more supportive, with more one-on-one care that they probably needed, rather than being in a really large hospital setting. So on the grounds of Craig Colony today, even this building does stand still. Today there's a medium security correctional facility on the site. Have you driven past it and seen it before? It's on Route 36 as you go out of Mount Morris toward Dansville. You can't go inside because it is a prison. So once my supervisor was like, I kind of want to just show you a couple of the buildings, and she drove me through, not like through a locked gate or anything, but through the little roads by the post office, old post office, and someone in a truck immediately appeared and was like, can I help you? She's like, oh, I'm just the historian, I just want to show my assistant, and they're like, time to go. So it's a security risk. You have to be careful. So you can't go visit inside usually, but unless you're invited for some reason, or going to visit someone. But many of the buildings are still there. This is called the administration building, where they took care of business. It is still kind of the first place that a visitor might go to enter the prison. So a lot of the buildings are still there. They've built some new ones, but even there are still even a few buildings that, built by the Shakers on that site. So it's this very layered site with all these different communities, if you can call them that, living there over the years. I'll just add the name Sanye. Have you ever heard that it was an acronym for Craig Colony for the epileptic hospital? Maybe not? All right. There's a story floating around that Sanye stands for State of New York Epileptic Asylum, but the name also goes back to indigenous roots. It's hard to know exactly how it translates, but the place in Groveland called Sanye has been called that since very, very early, much earlier than the hospital. So it's a myth, in case you ever hear it. Okay. We're going to go to Lima for a minute because we have some pretty cool things to talk about in Lima. Specifically today, the Genesee Wesleyan Seminary and College. I am speaking probably, are a lot of you from Lima? I know some people are from other places. Yeah, okay. You probably have heard these things before, but I'm going to touch on it because we're in Lima anyway. So up on College Street, right, on Genesee, is the old College Hall, and where the Lima Bible Institute is today. And it was started as the Genesee Wesleyan Seminary in the 1830s. And what's notable about it especially is that it was open to both boys and girls when it opened. And at that time, really, most seminaries, which is the equivalent of high school at the time, boys and girls were generally in separate seminaries. So it would be like a select female school or a regular or a seminary for the boys. But what was unusual about this is that boys and girls were both admitted, and it was unusual for sure for girls to go to secondary education. Most children just went to a one-room schoolhouse through about 8th grade or so, but some of them didn't even go that long. So, imagine you could just drop out at 8th grade and then go to work in the potato fields. But if you have, how fun. So, digging potatoes is more fun than it sounds, but you don't want it to do it for work, forever, by hand. The seminary up on the hill, expanded to several different buildings, several of which are still there today. And one of my favorite people who attended the Genesee College, which is, or she attended the seminary and then the college, which was on the same site and shared some buildings, is Belva Ann Lockwood. Her name is not like on the tip of our tongues most of the time these days, but she came to study at the seminary, so secondary education, when many girls did not go any further than their 8th grade education. Because they were going to probably raise a family and didn't need to go to school for longer. But she had other ideas. So she came to the seminary for a while and then went to, was admitted to the Genesee College on the same site, which was college level education. At that point, she became interested in being a lawyer. So she was studying with a local lawyer and learning about law. This is also something that women did not do back then. She had had a child, but her husband had passed away. Her second husband was supportive of her dreams to have a career at a time when women didn't do that very much either. And so she eventually did become one of the first lawyers in the country, women lawyers, and had quite an illustrious career, including running for president 2 times, in 1884 and 1887. So there is a technicality where someone else ran before her in 1872, but that woman was, if she had been elected, which she didn't really have a chance, but she did run. Had she been elected, she would have been too young to serve. Belva Ann Lockwood was not too young to serve as president. She also knew she probably wasn't going to actually get it, but she liked the idea that it was stirring up the question about what women's spheres are. What are women capable of doing, and can women be more than just mothers and homemakers? So she was interested in just stirring the pot and breaking that glass ceiling a bit. So she did get several thousand votes across the country. Yeah?
Did you say the college was a mixture of high school and college kids?
Apparently they did like eat meals together, but they had different courses for the most part. So there was some of the buildings were for the seminary only, and some were for the college only. But they're on the same. They were all the buildings are up on the hill up there.
Because they had a football team.
Yes, they
And
did.
they played high schools.
That's right. Yeah.
So that's why I was asking, was it a mixture of high school age kids, or were there kids in the 20s, late 20s?
In the 20s, yes, there were. Yeah.
Might still be playing against high school kids, the older kids would be playing.
Yeah, so a little bit more granularly, the seminary or the high school level institution was there until 1941, I think.
Okay. So,
Yes, thank you.
So that would.
And so that was still just, the high school was still going there, and Lima didn't have a high school right away. I think because of that, and because I recently learned, St. Rose had some high school level classes as well. So while that was a parochial school or a religious school, it still had the studies that were at that level for high school students. So the high school was a little later to come in here. The seminary kids, it's kind of another word for high school, and a lot of other towns were beginning to centralize their school districts and have an actual high school at that point. They didn't call it a seminary anymore. This one is still called a seminary, but it was effectively a high school team.
Okay.
And so they would have played in that league together. Does that help a little?
It does.
Yeah, and then the college that I mentioned that Belva Ann Lockwood attended moved to Syracuse and became Syracuse University in the 1870s, I think. So the college by that point was gone.
Is it connected to Houghton today?
I don't believe so. I think it became, the foundation of Syracuse. Yeah. Yes.
So I have some promotional materials from 1890s when my great aunt attended, and they were very specific, very clear to detail how the women were kept protected. It was pretty interesting by today's standards.
Yeah.
And then I also want to point out there was a youth bookshop in Mount Morris, I would say, some years ago. There was a female professor from Geneseo who did, I think there were 3 volumes, and I wish I thought it didn't. But there was, from like 1832, a notice, this is relative to women's place back then, So a guy from Lima sued a guy from Geneseo, and this was an ad in the Geneseo paper, if I remember correctly. He sold his wife to the guy to Geneseo. The guy from Geneseo didn't pay him, so he sued him, and this was the ad in the paper.
Wow.
And he either wanted the money or the wife. So,
Oh my goodness. That does say a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, and from what I've heard, very little. You couldn't really get a divorce without, except in a couple situations, and if those situations didn't happen, you were kind of stuck together, even if you didn't want to be married anymore. There was one holdover, I think, from colonial times where you could sell a man could sell his wife, and then that would kind of nullify the marriage. That could be what's happening. It's very unusual for this area. Because
What am I doing?
What's what you did? Is that what you said? Oh my gosh. So I do remember seeing that,
I know.
seeing something like that.
you might not be going out to it.
That's a whole other study area as well. All right, so the first woman presidential candidate was here in Lima, and then she ended up moving on, but part of the Equal Rights Party, and eventually that did lead to the women's suffrage, women being able to vote, and then run for president themselves and do a lot more things than they did in the 1880s. All right, another famous woman you probably have also heard of, or at least you've heard of what she created, Clara Barton with the American Red Cross. This is probably a little bit of an old story, but I think it's also a good one. So Clara Barton was born in Massachusetts and eventually came to this area, but she worked in the U.S. Patent Office before the Civil War. That was a pretty high-level job in the federal government for a woman at that time. So she had that background. And then when the Civil War broke out, she saw a need on the battlefield to bring supplies and help the wounded men who were fighting. So she was actually on the battlefield getting provisions, making sure there were bandages, and helping people. So she got the name the Angel of the Battlefield for her work. She then spent some time in Europe and worked with the Red Cross there, and it gave her an idea. There was a Red Cross organization in Europe doing these sorts of, I guess it was mostly kind of emergency support during conflicts at that point. It's become much more today. But that sort of planted a seed in her mind. She came back to the United States to kind of recuperate after doing more kind of war relief work in Europe. And she came to Dansville, and she stayed at the Castle on the Hill, which you can't really see it much anymore, it's all grown up. But have you heard of the Castle on the Hill or Our Home on the Hillside? Yeah. Also a really interesting place, deserves its entire presentation to itself. But it was a relatively progressive, interesting place where there were a lot of people coming for health benefits and also sometimes just as a resort a little bit. So Clara Barton was resting up, drinking the pure water there, eating the health food, not drinking any coffee probably because they didn't like when you did that there, and she had a home in Dansville and came and went for a number of years. So in 1881, she realized that she really wanted to bring an American Red Cross to fruition. So seeing what the Red Cross could do in Europe for especially zones experiencing conflict, she got a group of people together in St. Paul's Lutheran Church in Dansville. Trying to move to the next picture. There's over there. And together, those people chartered the very first chapter of the American Red Cross in all of the U.S. So its home was in Dansville. So, of course, the Red Cross has grown a great deal, and now it's known a lot for blood drives and providing medical supplies and all kinds of support during conflicts or emergencies. But they even help reunite people. They do an awful lot of service work in a lot of different ways. So this building here is now the American Red Cross Museum today. It was donated by the Noyes family of Dansville, a prominent family. So it's not Clara Barton's house, and it's not where the Red Cross began, but they do have a museum of Red Cross uniforms and photos and information about the organization today. Yes?
So the Lutheran Church still has the podium that Claire Barton used to speak from.
Oh, fantastic, yes. I know there's a historical marker out front too to recognize that church and that site. But the podium, that's a neat one. Thank you for sharing that.
Why is it called the Red Cross?
I believe it's the symbol, so it's like, I think it's like a red X. I don't remember why that was chosen in the first place. Yes?
It's
Thank you.
the cross, the crucifixes in the Middle East, you have the red crescent, and then Israel has the red Star of David.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate you knowing that. All right, so it's more of a Christian basis, I'm assuming, is what they were going for there. Yeah. And so when Clara Barton was in the Civil War on the battlefield, the story goes that she fashioned a little cross with a ribbon on her clothing to show that she was a relief worker and to try to help keep her safer. Thank you. Any other thoughts? All right. Okay, so Francis Bellamy. I'm sure you probably know what the Pledge of Allegiance is, even everyone here, more or less, right? Okay. So Francis Bellamy was born in Mount Morris in this house, which is still there. It also has a historical marker out front. This is an early photo of Francis Bellamy. So he's credited with writing the Pledge of Allegiance that we know today. The pledge itself has changed over the years. So the original version was, I pledge allegiance to my flag and the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So it's a little bit shorter. There have been some additions over the years. So let's see. So then, in 1923, the flag of the United States of America was added, and that was because Francis Bellamy later said he thought that this pledge could be used for any country. He just wanted to have a generic pledge, and you can just say my flag, and you know what I'm talking about. But then, during that time, right after World War I might add, they were like, we should probably specify that this is for the U.S. So it was added, the flag of the United States was added into. So then a few years went by, and in the 1950s there was the threat of communism. The Cold War was starting. And so President Eisenhower and the Congress added under God to after one nation.
And see, is a Catholic religious men's fraternity that I belong to, an officer that the Knights of Columbus.
Oh, okay, no way. Yeah, I'm sure there was some lobbying. Exactly. So that's more or less what we understand the pledge to be today. So it went through a few different changes. So obviously, Mount Morris considers itself one of the most patriotic towns because it's home of Francis Bellamy, and the murals there have his face. There's a lot of use of the American flag to recognize that. So it's a very proud point for Mount Morris, and has shaped its identity over the years for sure. So the only thing is that just a few years ago, in 2022, an 1892 newspaper was found by a researcher, and they found the pledge pretty much as Bellamy had originally written it, being recited by some Kansas school kids 3 months before Francis Bellamy said he wrote it. So it was the early spring of the same year that he said he wrote it. So, I'm just saying this is an alternate theory, but the connection that someone pointed out was later on he was a teenager, I think, had written into the magazine where Francis Bellamy was working at the time. It was the Youth's Companion. It was a contest to write a pledge, and it was because of the anniversary of Columbus coming to the North American continent. And so it's very fuzzy and uncertain about how exactly all of this evolved, but this new information is it's certainly interesting. It rocks Mount Morris's boat a little bit, so I don't want to say that Mount Morris can't have a claim to the pledge anymore. It's just when new information comes out, you sometimes have to be like a police detective and see if you can piece together the story. So even though his story may be complicated, we're going to keep looking for information to see if there is a truth that can be found. Francis Bellamy claimed for his whole life that he wrote it on a hot summer day, and everyone remembered that, and Congress decided that he was the author, and that's the official last word. But this newspaper was pretty interesting. So whatever the truth is, it's still a huge part of Mount Morris's story. Francis Bellamy's still from there, still grew up there, and is still inexorably connected to the Pledge of Allegiance. So I'm going to drop that right there. All right. Yeah. All right. So something that is one of the industries that really ties us all together in some way is agriculture. So whether you're involved with agriculture or you just are driving through our beautiful landscapes, agriculture is all around us, and it's been a big part of life in the Genesee Valley for so many generations, from the indigenous people to now, in fact. So these are just some fun images of different kinds of agriculture. Fun if you like pork, I guess, all the way in the corner. So people that have engaged in agriculture for just their own subsistence, like having their own little garden and raising chickens and having eggs, to it being a huge industry in our area. A couple photos here. We have, I think, either apples or potatoes, I'm not sure. Celery harvest in South Lima, which is a big part of, South Lima? All right. The soil there is perfect for growing celery and potatoes and onions and crops that need really rich, good soil. And of course, some chickens, my favorite. I grew up with chickens, so I still go visit my mom's chickens, and I love them. So some of the major industry parts, or the way that agriculture has become an industry here in the Genesee Valley, are the canneries. So we actually still have one, or a couple, we still have one in Leicester, Mount Morris today, where that pile of carrots picture came from. And Mount Morris has a long history of canning, starting with the Winters and Profit cannery in the 1870s. And so they were collecting all of these crops, vegetables, and canning was a relatively new way to preserve food. You would otherwise be drying things. There was some earlier canning, but they were on the process. They were taking advantage of new technology to make a metal can that you could just seal up and set on the shelf and sell commercially. So through the years, Mount Morris has continued to be a site of the canning industry. Today it's Seneca Foods just over the river in Leicester, and there have been a lot of people that have come here to work in the canning factories. So lots of farmers growing the crops, but it's also a great place for someone who's new to the country to come work because it's pretty easy labor. And also there's a lot of jobs in the factory, picking over the vegetables, making sure that there are no rotten beans in there or anything like that. I love this photo of a group of mostly, I think, Italian workers said to be in Mount Morris. And I love this guy. He's like really hamming it up for the camera. He's got a big basket. I think they're picking peas in this picture, green peas. So he's got a big basket of peas, and he's waving to the camera with another basket. So one of the early waves of immigration to this area was from Italy because of the situation in Italy, and people were trying to strike out and find new lives in the U.S. And so picking peas or something like that with the agriculture in our area was very appealing. Railroads were another that was a big employer for people who were just needed a job in one way or another. So as time went on, in the 1950s or so especially, the plant in Leicester, the canning factory, brought a lot of Puerto Rican folks here too. So there's still a pretty sizable Puerto Rican population in Mount Morris, and a lot of that is due to this canning factory industry that has been there for so long. There's Manny's Grocery downtown, and he has all the Goya things you could possibly want on Main Street, Mount Morris. So that has been a legacy that's carried on to today, and something you can even see in the community. So Seneca Foods is there. If you see Libby's brand, that's one of the brands that they can, supposedly. They mostly do beets and carrots, according to the big piles that you see if you drive past. And I think they do some corn too, perhaps. So a couple other kind of food-related industries that really are important in our area. At the top, Lunchables, Cool Whip. Anybody's favorite things? It's kind of funny to me that Cool Whip, it's apparently the only plant in the United States, or even the world, I think, that makes Cool Whip, and that's the Kraft Heinz plant in Avon. And it's kind of funny because we also rely on dairy in this area a lot, and Cool Whip is a non-dairy product. But all the same, it's a food processing place, and I mean, it's kind of cool that we're the only place where Cool Whip comes from. And Barilla is one of the others. So unfortunately, that kind of wheat that they use to make for pasta, that they make into pasta, doesn't grow super well in the Genesee Valley. Probably one of the few things that doesn't. It comes from the Midwest, and much of it is brought on the railroad, which is, there are still some active railroads around. I know that we don't see them much anymore, as much as they used to be. But Barilla in Avon is only the second factory of Barilla in the United States. And if you look at the box, and I keep forgetting to tell you what exactly the code is, but there's a printed code that tells you if it was made in Avon or somewhere else. Pretty much every box I've ever picked up has that. I think it's a U05 or something like that. It's made in the Avon plant. I'm sure it had to go to Texas before it came back here, but just because of the way distribution works. But a lot of the Barilla pasta that we have on our shelves is made right here in Avon. All right, let's make sure I'm doing okay on time. I'm getting close here. Okay, so salt mining is another huge industry in our area. Have you driven past the huge salt mine and seen the big pile of salt? They do still have a pile of salt this year. I know that last year was a really tough winter year as well, and they got kind of depleted. But so salt was discovered in, it's really there's a lot of salt around the Syracuse area as well. Salina is a town named after salt. But here in this area, York is kind of the epicenter of salt. There were some salt mines across the region at times. There's still a Morton Salt company near Letchworth State Park, so they make table salt. And this is American rock salt, so that's the big pile you see in Groveland if you're driving by. And so, yeah, that salt is a different kind used on the roads for ice. So this is down inside the mine in the old days. I believe the Retzoff mine. That would be in the town of York. And down there they used horses and some explosives and a lot of labor to get the salt out and up to the surface. Being a dry, kind of a dry mine, you're actually like taking the salt out dry, was somewhat unusual. Sometimes a lot of the other plants were pumping water down in or bringing up brine in one way or another and then evaporating it. But this method is you just chip out the salt and bring it up to the surface. I was reading that they had mules and horses down in there and even made them like a little barn, a little stable, and made sure that their feet were out of the salt at least part of the day because it would be kind of hard on them. But they could even live down there for some period of time. Not out on grass like I'm sure they would like to be, but that took a lot of work. So the Retzoff salt mine started in the 1880s, and eventually, you probably heard there was a collapse of the mine in the 1990s. So that particular company kind of shut down, but then passed the torch in a way to American rock salt. So they're in Groveland, and they're at least the part that you can see above ground is in Groveland, but they're mining way under the ground in quite a large area. Bringing up an unbelievable amount of salt all the time. I don't actually know how they keep finding it down there, but there's a lot of salt there. So it's the largest operating mine in the U.S., they claim. So at least the kind of mine that they are, bringing up that dry salt. Yes.
Where did they find the ground?
Did they find the salt? It is thousands of feet underground, and it's left over from an ancient saltwater sea.
What's the exact location, though? Is it?
I think that they don't publish maps of exactly where their mine is, but it stretches out under Groveland, Geneseo, York, and further, I believe. It's quite extensive in this network. Of course, they have to be careful to not take out too much, which is partly why they had some trouble in the 1990s. You have to leave some pillars so that it doesn't collapse.
I have another question. I've heard much of that place when people were working, they got stuck.
I've heard that people were stuck, the miners got stuck at one point and were trapped in the mine.
Yes, there have been some accidents, but I have to look up exactly when that one happened that you're remembering.
Did people survive?
I think in some cases, but I know that there have been fatal accidents as well in the past. Yeah, at Retsock anyway. Yeah, it's a tough and dangerous business. I think it's safer now than it used to be generally, but it's still dangerous. You're way underground. If you have claustrophobia, don't do it. All right. I think we're almost going to run over, so I've just got to tell one last story and then open it up for a couple thoughts. So, connected to the Retsock salt mine in York was this little community called Little Italy. So there were many of the workers were also Italian. This was sort of a company town, so families lived in these little houses, had their own gardens, had a general store they could go to. And one of the fun stories that came out of this is this pepper. It's called the Retsock pepper, and people who've been living in the Retsock area, their families going back several generations, still grow this kind of pepper and say that it was developed at Retsock. Maybe the seeds were brought with people from Italy and grown, and maybe it's evolved a little bit, but it's known as a local vegetable, and so I try to grow them every year when I can. You can find them at J&A, I think, in the spring if you're quick, as little starts, little plants.
You have a green one too?
I think if you picked it young, it would be green, but it's supposed to be red when it's ripe. And it's not spicy. It's just a sweet pepper. I think it's known for frying in a pan. You can add it to anything at that point. All right.
Is there anything left of Little Italy?
There are foundations, and it's now Little Italy Nature Preserve. It's owned by the Genesee Valley Conservancy, so it's open. There's a trail through it, and it is now open to the public. They're going to be. They just acquired it, so they're going to improve the trails and put up some signs and things. So yes, just foundations. Some of the houses were moved away. Many of them are gone today. I don't know if anyone recognizes this event. It's a Lima favorite. Yeah, I know what it is. Yes, Crossroads. It's the event race. Yep, that's what they're doing. So this is just a placeholder. I know that we basically are out of time, and I want to let you guys go the rest of your evening. But as we look at the bed race picture and think about this area, is there anything that you would want to add to this list off the top of your head for the 205-year anniversary of our county and our area?
The guy that was born in Lima for the New York Times,
Yes, Raymond.
Raymond.
Yes, he founded the New York Times. Is that right?
He went to the Genesee Western County.
He also was an alumni.
Yeah.
All right, good.
Daniel Shays,
Daniel Shays.
buried at the southern end of Canisius Lake.
He is, yeah. He's noted for the Shays Rebellion, a leader of the Shays Rebellion, which...
He's a Massachusetts guy.
He is a Massachusetts guy. Yep.
He was part of Sullivan's campaign.
Yes, he was...
Revolutionary War.
I believe he was. Whether he came through on that campaign, he was certainly a Revolutionary War veteran as well. Yep. Yeah. And the actions of that event really helped to create the U.S. in some ways. So he's a really important figure, you're right. Yes?
What about Corn Planter?
Yeah. Corn Planter and his brother Handsome Lake were born at Canawagas and grew up there. Corn Planter was a military leader in the Seneca Nation. And Handsome Lake was known as a prophet, so he had started a traditional religion for the Seneca people, many of whom actually still follow those teachings to this day. They're very relevant.
What about Red Jacket?
Also Red Jacket, another really decorated, well-known military leader of the Seneca people. A little controversial because of his roles in the treaties, but still a very notable person. Several portraits of him.
But he won a trial arguing for the defense.
Yes.
which was rare.
Right, yeah, that is rare, considering his position.
Yeah.
Yep,
Chester Arthur, President Chester Arthur, has a
Yeah.
connection to, went to private school in Geneseo, but I believe he was from New York originally, wasn't he?
yeah, his father was a preacher and lived in New York for a while, so he went to a little schoolhouse there, and unfortunately his brother passed away while they were here, so his brother's grave is still in the town of York.
The private college in Geneseo, that he went to, a little private school, has been renovated into a home today.
Oh,
As you
yeah.
walk into the house, it still has his locker.
Oh,
This
cool.
is Chester Arthur.
Really?
That's right by the
Interesting.
cemetery.
Temple Hill,
Yeah,
Temple Hill is the bed and breakfast you're thinking of. Our office has been looking for more documentation about him actually attending there, so it's a little bit up in the air whether he went there or not, because the family had moved on by that point, by the time he would have been attending high school. But there's always more to look for, isn't there? Yeah, absolutely.
Just an interesting note, he said that, you talked about how the New England town names came here. If you look at Michigan, there's Romulus, there's Bloomfield, Livonia, all those names in Michigan came from here.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yep, exactly. There's even Livingston County, I think Illinois and Michigan, several names that have been passed on.
And of course, in Ohio, Western Reserve, Northeast Ohio, they have commons, and some of their towns look like with like New England with the congregational churches and the commons. And also, it's not so much Livingston County history, but the food can was invented in Fairport, Monroe County, which is also the same car from Ontario, Genesee County, the same year that Livingston County was from the same two counties, the neighboring counties, and it's also disputed in Seneca County history as to whether or not Memorial Day was actually started in Waterloo, and whether or not Frank Capra took his idea for Seneca Falls from Bedford Falls from Seneca Falls, because there's a town in Rhode Island that has George and Mary Bailey buried side by side, husband and wife, and then there's Bedford Falls and Fall River, Massachusetts nearby. There's in between the two towns.
Yeah, so many connections. Okay, one more.
Blodgett?
I'm sorry, who was it?
Blodgett, wasn't she the first judge?
Barbara Blodgett, yes, the first woman justice.
Woman
Yeah.
justice,
Yeah.
and she was from.
Yeah, in Lima.
Yeah.
Exactly, yes. Beautiful.
I have a question from earlier. You said husbands could sell their wives? Wives sell their husbands?
No, sorry, we're still working on that.
I'm in trouble.
Oh, yeah, Underground Railroad. Also extremely hard to document the Underground Railroad in this area. I have hardly anything but a lot of stories at my office. So certainly people were passing through this area and escaping slavery, but it's hard to know where exactly they would stay. So, yes.
We also did something like this on the Underground Railroad at a different library.
You did? Cool. Anything about local stuff here? Or just general? Yeah. That's very cool. I know, it's quite an amazing period of time. Yeah.
Underground Railroad went up 15 and 15A into the city, and across the Washtown line is their descendant was the first Washtown historian. The Holocaust worker, Beverly City, probably the Underground Railroad, on the Spokehead Road.
Yeah, there are so many spots that are supposedly, perhaps, maybe part of that whole network. Pretty cool to think about. So I'm still looking for that too. All right, I know we're a little bit over time, so I know I'd be happy to talk with you after, but thank you for being here tonight, and I think, I'm proud to be here. I feel like people here are caring and accepting and proud of everything that we have in this region, the values and the history that make us who we are today. We kind of think about that Genesee Valley DNA. We can hopefully better participate in our communities, be part of things, appreciate our amazing area. There's a lot going on here, and just keep improving and caring for each other. So thank you so much for coming. rest, anyone else who wants to